Welcome to another conversation with the great Harry Litman. Today we are talking about the latest news from the Supreme Court, which is that the Supreme Court has cleared the way for the dismissal of Steve Bannon's January 6th related obstruction of Congress conviction. And if we look at this in the big picture, this is the second time that Donald Trump has cleared Steve Bannon from criminal liability. The first time he had to go through the precaution of issuing a last minute pardon that would have prevented a federal trial for Steve Bannon for bilking donors for We Build the Wall, that border wall charity along the southern border. This time it has to do with Steve Bannon dodging a congressional subpoena from the House January 6th committee. And the Supreme Court has decided, because the Trump DOJ decided that they want to dismiss the case, they were not going to intervene. But it gets a little bit more complicated than that. And to pull it, look at it closely and go really into the weeds here, going to speak to my friend Harry Litman. Harry, how are you doing?
I'm good, Adam. Good to be with you and good to be on All Rise News as always. Yeah, look, you can say it's the court because the court did refuse to review the case, but it's the department, and this is so bogus. It's really a variant of what they did last week with Flynn when they just said, help yourself to the Treasury. Cases are supposed to be adversarial. This one clearly was adversarial, and it was righteous. Just to review the bidding briefly, he clearly was contemptuous of Congress. No, I won't answer your questions. 4 such people were referred for prosecution to the Biden Justice Department, the Merrick Garland Justice Department. They looked at all of them carefully, conservatively. They greenlighted 2, and they didn't greenlight 2. The one example that they didn't greenlight, Mark Meadows, not because he had a really good leg to stand on, but when they looked at it, maybe, just maybe, because he's so close to Trump, they'd have trouble proving scienter, or they thought it wasn't so fair. Bannon was always complete crock of shit. What he said in not doing it was, I'm relying on executive privilege, as if he'd spoken to Trump. There is no such thing as executive privilege for someone who's not in the executive branch. He's just a citizen at the time. So it was always a trash argument. And the court said so when he then went to trial, was convicted, served 4 months, which he's done already, even though it was such a weak case. The district court said, you got to start serving your sentence now. You don't have anything good to really even bring up to the Court of Appeals. The Court of Appeals said, no, you have no argument here. There's no possible argument that you could have relied on executive privilege. We don't credit it. And that's the reason that he was in jail. And then what happened after the switch of administrations? The DOJ came and said, we think it's in the interest of justice to dismiss the case. No reason given. And of course, there is no possible reason in the interest of justice. It's in the interest of FOD, friends of Donald or Trump. That's the only thing. It was a direct order. And here's what it meant in our system. And this is, there have been a series of cases like this. There is no one to prosecute. It's no longer an adversarial proceeding. And in the federal system, there is theoretically a possibility of appointing someone outside the department when the department doesn't want to handle it. But it's the courts basically have not greenlighted that, Adam, because the DOJ is there to be the representative of the United States. So what happened here is the Supreme Court just bowed to the inevitable, because what had been U.S. versus Bannon basically became nobody versus U.S. and Bannon on the same side. So it just evaporates. But it's really important to recognize that it's simply, instead of doing the job of taking care that the laws be executed and doing a righteous case. They just said, for no reason, interests of justice is the equivalent. We want to cut another break, a second break, as you say, to Trump's buddy Bannon. So we're going to dismiss, and then there's nothing to be done or said. There's no one to prosecute anymore. So that's what happened. It's not a kind of outreach by the Supreme Court. It's just a complete, what I've called in other cases, jumping of the V. And they're now on the same side with it's the flip side of a reprisal prosecution. Here's our buddy. With reprisal prosecutions, we are adverse and make up shit. Here, we jump over to their side and say there's nothing to be done. We're not going to fight it. And when that happens, you can't fight it, at least not in our system. In some state systems, you could. So just nobody should be, at all kind of deceived about A, what's happened, but B, the gravity of it. Just, it's really accepted. A new Department of Justice follows through, unless it truly weren't in the interests of justice. But we saw this go through the courts. We saw his reasons that he proffered. Well, I maybe could have believed it, even though it wasn't true. Really not holding water at all. And it's simply, kind of an inside job by the mob boss, as it were, that Bannon now has this case go away.
Right. And setting aside the doing friends for allies and anything that the allies want, if they want some U.S. taxpayer money from the Treasury, go at it. If they want to erase their criminal liability, go at it. Let's talk about the unusual procedural posture of both of these things, because when you talk about the We Build the Wall fraud case, this was the pardon that Bannon benefited from in that case was before there was a trial. Bannon was charged with 3 other people, and those 3 other people were convicted of defrauding donors of this border wall charity. Now, the procedural posture in this one, I will say, frankly, really surprised me. Not that the Department of Justice was trying to do this under Trump, that this is what the Trump DOJ does, but how it was going about it. As you mentioned, Bannon was already convicted of obstructing Congress. This case was over. As you said, he served his sentence. What does it say, this procedural gambit of not even bothering the clemency process, just saying after the case is over, we're going to dismiss this indictment, which at this point is a conviction, to make it disappear? Can you think of anything like it?
Yes, but only within this administration. So just 2 points to raise, and your question's really, goes to the heart of this, Adam. First, yes, I think he's probably abused his powers in no way more than in the pardon setting, but still, there it's considered a kind of political conduct. In part, he's taken it to huge new lengths, but people or con law professors or whatever understand that can be for capricious personal reasons, like Biden and his family. People didn't like that pardon, but they didn't like political grounds. This is really different. This is a way of saying you can't do this case anymore. And why is that? Because it still was working its way up the Supreme Court, so it wasn't quite final. They did this recently in another case that I think I'll remember in a moment, but it's really different because it's through the guys and the offices of the Department of Justice, and their job is to carry through as an institutional matter. But even leaving that aside, if they've given the justice system already has given an answer to Bannon's really threadbare arguments, which is no, 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 you can't even imagine that you could have relied on executive privilege. So they're just kind of steamrolling that, but not with even the semblance of either it's just our caprice because we feel like it because it's a pardon, or any legal argument. There's none to make. It's simply, yeah, I know our job is to enforce the law. Yeah, I know the courts have said The law absolutely points in Bannon's direction, but too bad we see it as not an interest of justice for no reason. That's point one. And then point two, to this broader notion. Look, I think it is part and parcel of this Orwellian. All Rise News folks are familiar with that, and I think Talking Feds are as well. It's not simply it serves. They've jumped the V both to do a solid to Trump's wingman, but also it's part and parcel of this whole reworking, remaking, erase, and rewriting of the history of what happened. What was he supposed to testify about? About January 6th and his role in it. Remember, Bannon had said January 5th, January 4th, it's gonna be wild. There's gonna be stuff coming on. He was obviously involved. The American people should have heard about that. It was his contempt had a real cost to the public, and it was certainly justified for him to be referred and prosecuted. And so they're just, taking a whitewash to it and whitewashing it. So I'll just say it's also part of this really anti-democratic, but also just nasty project of Trump and company to try to rewrite history.
Now, the only antecedent that I can think of in my career of the Justice Department trying to dismiss a conviction, I think of the case of Michael Flynn. And I see a couple of people asking this question in the chat.
Where do you see that? You're good. You can follow the comments, huh? So impressed. Okay.
Well, we're approaching the 1-year anniversary of All Rise News. You pick up that skill set. But about the question that is burning on the minds of a lot of the commenters, that is this Flynn all over again. And of course, after Flynn was pardoned and after the Trump Justice Department during his first term tried to torpedo the case by dismissing it post-conviction, what do we have this year? We have Flynn suing for damages and being handsomely rewarded to the tune of more than $1 million. Might Bannon say, hey, I like money?
Not just Bannon. We already know. So let me just say, it is Flynn all over again. Absolutely. All of this is, you assume that the DOJ will be adverse to criminals or accused criminals. Instead, they jump the V and get into bed with the criminal. You could say this is worse in a way, Adam, just in the sense that the most serious thing that the Department of Justice does is deprive people of liberty. So with Flynn, they're saying, oh, help yourself to some cash of the taxpayers. That's really bad. And with Bannon, though, we're just erasing the really considered judgment, not just of the fact finders, but also the courts of appeals, and went all the way up. You are guilty, my friend, and don't try to think otherwise. In some ways, that's more serious. In actual, as the rubber hits the road, maybe less, because as you say, he's already served his sentence, but it's preparatory to his being able to walk free and say, I've never done anything wrong. I've got a clean slate. And who knows, by the way, how that could avail him in the future. But there are so many people who have been convicted in this country that would love to be able to just say it never happened, and that they are jumping the V to completely remove criminal liability. That's very serious. But back to maybe now it would be no less outrageous for him to now say, I want to, not only was it not righteous, it was a travesty, and give me money too. And we know already in the wake of Flynn, 2 days after Flynn's settlement, which was never subjected to any adversity, never brought up against the standards of the Federal Tort Claims Act and what damages you're supposed to have and not have, and they really are very discreet. And of course, in the background is Donald Trump. I want $230 million for this. You have a class action filed in federal court by January 6 folks against whom? Police officers, customs officers. This is like the height of brazenness, right? They want money because they were subjected to the use of force by when they're, trying to mow down, use tear gas, beat, and actually completely overcome the officers on the scene. It's the same idea. You just totally change history, have a sort of total Orwellian, new form in, and they become heroes. It becomes a love-in, and the police who were trying their best and weren't even able, were overwhelmed, become the villains. It's stunning. It's stunning first, just the kind of reversal, but it's also stunning doubly because it's not the facts. We saw the facts. It's a total project of imposing fiction that makes Donald Trump look good, but makes the whole country trivialize and ignore, what do you got to say, the worst crime against the democracy, with only this possible exception of the Civil War. Now, the idea is that textbooks, and when Michael Flynn took his big chunk of change, the DOJ, and they'll put out this helps remedy a terrible transgression that society did. They say crap like that now,
Right.
and it's really meant to propagate a total bogus version. So anyway, to all the people who are saying, is this like Flynn? Yeah, in some ways it's a little worse, in some ways a little better, but the basic idea that you have a new crowd in office and they are absolutely aligned with criminals, with however you want to slice it, people who, yeah, it was the old administration, but courts approved it, higher courts approved it under the law. We all saw it. They're jumping the V, with the result that these people, help yourself to the federal treasury. Oh, don't worry about that little criminal conviction between friends. It's a frigging outrage.
To your point, Harry, it's one of the reasons why I found the ruling, a federal judge's ruling advancing the January 6th related claims
Hmm.
of members of Congress
Yeah.
and police officers who reported for duty at the Capitol that day so important. The fact that that is going forward at the same time that this effort to rewrite history is happening should be noted, that that January 6th related case, that those are still alive and still very important, and the only reckoning because of Trump's second presidency that will have over January 6th related claims are going to be in the civil arena. So I'm going to be keeping a close eye on that. I
And we hope you
mentioned
will. Just briefly on that, there's just no V to jump. That's when, because it's a civil case. It's Swalwell versus Trump, et cetera, and that's what keeps it alive. But it's just really important. This has been from day one, hour one, and pardoning all the January 6th folks, his big project. But we've had all these cases, and you've covered them beautifully, but it's been about temporary relief. But they're big, and now in fact, this one I think will probably be years, and the judicial system will do the best it can. But now, it's fighting uphill, not simply against whatever valid defense claims they would bring, including immunity, but really against a nakedly propagandistic process to try to just pull the wool over the country's eyes, change the facts. That's what dictatorships do. That's not what democracies do.
Right. And to your point that it's going to take years, I wouldn't be in the least bit surprised if the people who assaulted cops on January 6th wind up getting compensation well before, years before, the police officers who were injured, who were assaulted, who were pepper
Yes.
sprayed, who were induced to have a heart attack, all of those horrible things that happened on January 6th, it's going to take them years rather than the collusive Justice
Right.
Department.
The only thing between the other guys, they bring your wheelbarrow, wheel it right into the Fisk here, and start scooping in. The DOJ can do that, but understand what they're doing nominally. They're settling claims. So in theory, a DOJ, a good steward of the Fisk, says, it looks like we're responsible maybe for $5 million. Would you settle for 3? That's not what's happening here. It's just we're responsible for nothing. You're completely outrageous for claiming a penny. You want to come in and take 1.25 million? How's that? Would that please you today, Mr. Flynn? That's what it is.
Right. And for folks on All Rise News, I picked apart some of the list of the names that they put in this lawsuit. And these are some of the violent people. These are people who assaulted police, who assaulted an AP reporter. Those are names specifically mentioned of the people who are seeking compensation. And if history is any precedent by which we can prognosticate the future, what they will likely get in the millions of dollars. I want to shift gears a little bit
Yeah.
because I promised people the weeds, and we go
Okay.
into the weeds, Harry.
I'm the
Um,
weedy guy. Bring it. Bring it.
and the grounds on which the
Yeah.
Supreme Court cleared the path to dismiss a case against Steve Bannon was, to your point, this was the DOJ wants to do this, and therefore we steer it toward dismissal because prosecutors have that discretion. But that wasn't the grounds on which the DOJ applied. I'm going to read the questions
Yeah.
presented to the Supreme Court, and they presented these two questions: whether a defendant willfully makes default of a congressional subpoena if he intentionally refuses to give testimony or produce papers based on a good faith but incorrect assertion of executive privilege. And the second question was whether petitioner is entitled to relief from his contempt of Congress convictions based on an argument that the committee had that subpoenaed him was unlawfully composed when he did not raise such argument to the committee itself. So two of the questions get to the heart of, does Bannon, believing he had executive privilege, save him from his convictions, and attacking the legitimacy of the House January 6th committee, which is a longtime Trump goal? Do you find it significant at all, one way or another, that the Supreme Court punted on that question? They said, look, you want to dismiss a case, you have the power to dismiss a case, but we're not touching these two questions.
Yeah, it's a great question, and I can't speak. I was a clerk up there, and so if I had drawn this, I would have had to have written the pool memo. This petition and those questions were framed by Bannon and he couldn't just frame the tendentious political version of it. He needed the legal point, although he said a good faith but incorrect or not in bad faith, and that already is a tendentious, unfair characterization of what the Court of Appeals held. Because he's coming in and appealing from the Court of Appeals, and at that point, that's before the court. Then DOJ comes in and says, we think in the interest of justice, this should be dismissed. So now you're the clerk, you've got this question, and you say, DOJ, however, so here's the question. First, I think the first thing they would say is, this isn't worth considering because it's so well settled. There's nothing for the court to say because he's totally wrong. And if it were a normal process, they would just deny cert, and that would be the end of the matter. But now it intervenes that the DOJ is saying we're not doing anything. And now what that clerk has to say is, if we grant this, DOJ won't offer an opposing brief. It just won't be served up. Even if you thought this was a good question to think about, and I don't think you should because he's so wrong. It's ungainly, Adam, and you're the Supreme Court. You decide what case you want to take. So I don't think we should. People often, not on All Rise News, but often take um, denials of cert as something to do with the merits. That's wrong. There's all kinds of reasons they wouldn't, but it's really, really wrong here because it changes everything. I've had cases like this when, for other reasons, the whole thing kind of collapses or someone dies or whatever. And you're advising the court then, and you would have to tell the court, we don't have adversity. We're going to have, there's no, they could have. Technically, Adam, they could have taken the case and appointed someone to argue the other side. At this point, that's happened before. That's sort of the role that Paul Clement played in, and that's one of the, what was the case where Clement had to sort of stand in because the DOJ
Oh, that was Eric Adams. Yeah,
the
former New
Eric
York
Adams,
City
and
mayor.
that I think that's another case that they just let go. But once they, at this point, for the Supreme Court to take a non-cert worthy question, because it's just he's just full of it. He's got no leg to stand on. If you read the Court of Appeals opinion, and one where the DOJ just won't be doing, they'll say that's a good one to not use your limited resources on. So I understand. And I know your viewers do too, that was the technical questions presented. But I guarantee you, when somebody dies and 5 more years pass and we can see the cert memo, what you'll see is this case is a mess. DOJ says they're out of here, and maybe that's unjust, but there's really nothing we can do about it. I recommend deny.
And the thing that I have a hard time still wrapping my head around,
Yeah.
and look, I know we have seen enough evidence that this Department of Justice is about rewarding Trump's allies, protecting the allies, and going after the enemies. And that part I can wrap my head around. The thing that I am having a hard time wrapping my head around is that Steve Bannon served his sentence. He was convicted. And that this is the first time that I can remember in covering the courts for nearly 2 decades where the Department of Justice is trying to torpedo its own conviction
Yeah.
after a sentence has been served. Now they
And
tried
they've gone up on appeal, and it's been, they've rejected the very claims he's making. Yeah.
exactly, and there was almost the germs of this discussion in the Mike Flynn case, but before that was resolved, Trump gave Flynn a pardon. That's not how it happened here. So
Right.
when we talk about Orwell, when we talk about the rewriting of history,
Yeah.
why does Trump need to exercise his pardon power? Why does he need to exercise his clemency power? If you can direct your captured Department of Justice to dismiss a case where you prevailed, is this, not to mix up our dystopian novels, a
Right,
brave
right.
new world?
Are we on Animal Farm or are we on 1984? Here's the quick answer. Everything changes, and this is why they held out. They asked for a delay, and once the Supreme Court denies cert, because then a case becomes final, and you can't just wipe out a conviction. What they've said here, and they've done in a few. This is what technically they did with the Trump case itself, the criminal prosecution. We're just not going to do anything anymore. We consider it not in the interest of justice. So that case dies on the vine. But if it goes all the way to the Supreme Court and it becomes a final conviction, then it's just the pardon power. And a lot of people, by the way, with final convictions for reputational and other reasons, do still want a pardon. But they have this extra ability, as long as a case isn't final, to change the tune and take the other novel. And he doesn't have to use his pardon power, though God knows he doesn't seem shy about it. So that would have been, I guess, plan B here, is to give Bannon a pardon. But Bannon himself, technically, he's been 4 months in the clink, and yet he can say this case, in a sense, never happened. So in terms of true rewriting Orwellian fantasy, this is slightly higher solid for this particular friend of Donald.
And to gild the lily on
Yeah.
this point, after Bannon's conviction, no, excuse me, when after his charging and his pardon with the
The other
We
one,
Build the
yeah.
Wall fraud case, he didn't have to stand trial, but he was charged again by a local prosecutor. And that was Manhattan DA Alvin Bragg. And rather than stand trial, it pleaded out to a non-jail sentence, but there was a plea there. Is there any recourse in this case? It's January 6th related obstruction of Congress. It seems like obstruction of Congress is a pretty federal specific
Yeah.
statute. So that's pretty much the end here, isn't it?
I think so. The victim here is Congress. There's so many cases that could also be brought stateside. And remember, this is in effect this case has been vaporized. It sort of never happened. So if you could bring a general fraud case or whatever, but it's contempt of Congress. That's just doesn't state a state crime anywhere. It's just classic, offense to the federal system. And that, by the way, is the whole other point. Look, it was an important investigation that really benefited the country. He said, "Screw you! I won't give you the information that you need from me." And he never had a leg to stand on. So it's that has literally been, he's resuscitated from the grave. I am trying to learn. You'll have to give me some pointers, Adam. But I'm seeing these things come up, and everything people are saying about Flynn is right. Also, but again, if you get to it before the pardon here happened, before the conviction became final, and then they have all kinds of operating room. But then, and you might see Bannon say this, just as Adam is doing. Okay, now I want to say the whole thing was corrupt and illegitimate and weaponized, and give me some money. That could happen too. It's all when you're in this Orwellian world where there's the whole thing we depend on as a society, not even in criminal cases, in all cases, is adversariness. We got in this case, the good guys and the bad guys. The good guys enforce the law. The bad guys break the law. Here, the bad guy broke the law. The good guys started to enforce it, and then they said, in the interest of justice, we want to dismiss. The good guys got into bed with the bad guys, and when that happens, the whole system falls apart.
That is quite a note to end on. And in case you have any additional thoughts and any closing thoughts on all of these subjects we've been talking about.
Well, it really is basically that I see this, Adam, as part and parcel of a bigger trend, and it's got to do with pardons. It's got to do with different end runs around the law. But what it really has to do with is this broader project that we still have as a society the power to stop. We're not going to Trump now has beaten his criminal prosecution, etc. But history should, I would say history must, judge him fairly and accurately for what he did and the actual facts. And all of this, including the unfair help yourself to money, Michael Flynn, the unfair let's just erase this between friends little criminal conviction, the broader enterprise of literally trying to pretend this didn't happen, have seventh grade history books when people come to the Washington and see the gross he's doing, then to read this
I
was
lost you there
all
for a second, Harry.
et
Can
cetera.
you hear me?
Yes, that is part that my final thought, Adam, is just, and I'm sorry if I go over, that it's part of this really ugly project that we can still stop. History can still prevail, must prevail.
That's a very good note to end on. And if I can give my closing thought here is that for me, the significance of this outcome to the Bannon case wasn't that it wasn't predictable. We could see this happening as soon as the Trump Justice Department moved to dismiss this case. Now the Supreme Court gave them clearance to do so, like they were expected to do, because the Trump Justice Department has this power. And now that they have used this power to the first time that I can see successfully post conviction, it seems like a powerful tool in how you phrased it perfectly, trying to rewrite history, which is why actually getting the record straight is so important. Thank you, Harry. Once again, always a pleasure doing these Substack Lives.
Yeah, let's do it again soon. That's why I'm on X-Fed. Good to
on
see you.
and so that's a very good reminder for folks who have been watching this whole time, or maybe you joined late in the game. Maybe you became a viewer number 1,000 very recently
Oh yeah, there we are.
for this live stream, but you missed a good part of our conversation. Make sure to take a moment to subscribe both to All Rise News and Talking Fed's Substack so you can hear the whole conversation, hear the full analysis. As you've heard throughout the conversation, we both think that this is a significant case for a long-standing trend in Trump 2.0. So till the next time.
See everybody.
So long.